Detective Sarah Matthews knew she needed allies who couldn't be corrupted or intimidated, so she reached out to investigative journalist Rebecca Chun at the Times. Rebecca had built her career exposing high-level corruption and had resources that Scotland Yard couldn't provide, namely, the ability to publish evidence even if official investigations were suppressed. Their first meeting took place in a crowded London coffee shop, where Sarah carefully explained the situation without revealing specific details about the recordings. Rebecca's eyes widened as she understood the implications of what Sarah was describing. "If what you're suggesting is true," Rebecca said quietly, "this represents the biggest royal scandal since the abdication crisis. But it also means we're both in serious danger from people who have already demonstrated they'll destroy anyone who threatens them." Sarah appreciated Rebecca's direct approach. Unlike police administrators who worried about political consequences, Rebecca understood that exposing the truth was worth personal risks. They agreed to work together, with Rebecca using her media contacts to verify information while Sarah continued gathering evidence through official channels. Rebecca's first breakthrough came when she discovered that Sir Edmund Whitmore owned luxury properties in 3 different countries that couldn't possibly be afforded on his official salary. Public records showed purchases totaling over £8 million, all made within the past 5 years while he served as palace financial advisor. Meanwhile, Lady Catherine Pembroke's lifestyle revealed similar discrepancies. Despite her modest government salary, she owned a yacht moored in Monaco, maintained homes in London and Tuscany, and had made charitable donations exceeding her entire official income. Rebecca's investigation revealed these assets were purchased through shell companies connected to the same offshore accounts mentioned in Marcus Thompson's recordings. But, as their investigation progressed, both Sarah and Rebecca noticed increased surveillance and harassment. Sarah's apartment was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen, sending a clear message that her activities were being monitored. Rebecca received anonymous threats warning her to abandon her misguided investigation before facing serious consequences. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Rebecca convinced Marcus Thompson to meet with a Times photographer who specialized in covert documentation. Marcus, despite his fears, agreed to be photographed with copies of his recordings, creating visual evidence that the audio files were authentic and originated from a credible source. During this photo session, Marcus revealed additional information he hadn't shared with Sarah. He explained that his recordings were just one part of a larger pattern of surveillance conducted by several palace employees who'd grown concerned about the corruption they witnessed. "I wasn't the only one recording," Marcus told Rebecca. "At least 2 other guards were documenting things they saw, and one of the housekeeping staff was photographing documents she found in private offices. We all knew something was wrong, but we were too scared to coordinate our efforts." This revelation led Sarah and Rebecca to search for these other potential witnesses. They discovered that Thomas Bradley, a guard who'd worked the East Wing morning shift, had photographed financial documents showing unauthorized fund transfers. Jennifer Walsh, a senior housekeeper with access to private offices, had documented evidence of secret meetings with foreign dignitaries who weren't recorded in official visitor logs. Both Thomas and Jennifer had resigned within weeks of Marcus, all citing personal reasons that their colleagues found suspicious. When Sarah and Rebecca tracked them down, they found people living in fear but willing to share their evidence if it might finally expose the corruption they'd witnessed. Thomas's photographs revealed documentation of payments from Chinese business interests in exchange for advance information about British trade policies. The images showed bank transfer records, meeting notes, and correspondence that proved senior royal staff were selling state secrets for personal enrichment. Jennifer's evidence was even more damning. Her photographs showed visitor logs that had been altered to hide meetings with representatives from authoritarian regimes, expense reports that grossly understated the costs of personal travel charged to government accounts, and correspondence discussing the sale of British honors and titles to wealthy foreign nationals. Combined with Marcus's recordings, this evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption that extended far beyond financial fraud. The palace officials weren't just stealing money. They were compromising British national security by selling access to state secrets and policy information to foreign powers. But, as Sarah and Rebecca prepared to publish their findings, The corruption network struck back with devastating effectiveness. Thomas Bradley was arrested on fabricated drug charges, with police claiming to have found substantial quantities of cocaine in his apartment. Jennifer Walsh suddenly faced tax evasion allegations that could result in criminal prosecution and financial ruin. Even more troubling, Rebecca's editor at the Times received a call from someone claiming to represent concerned palace officials, who warned that publishing unverified allegations could result in serious legal consequences for the newspaper. The caller suggested that Rebecca might be suffering from mental health issues that were affecting her judgment about the reliability of her sources. Sarah realized they were facing the same character assassination tactics that Lady Catherine had described in the recordings. The corruption network was systematically destroying the credibility of everyone who threatened them, using their influence within law enforcement and media organizations to silence opposition. The situation became desperate when Chief Inspector Morrison informed Sarah that her investigation was being transferred to a special unit that handled sensitive constitutional matters. This meant her evidence would disappear into a bureaucratic structure controlled by the same officials who were being investigated. Sarah, you need to understand that some investigations are too important to be handled through normal channels, Morrison explained with obvious discomfort. The Crown Protection Unit has resources and expertise that regular police departments can't provide. Sarah recognized this as a polite way of telling her that powerful people had intervened to suppress her investigation. The Crown Protection Unit was notorious for making sensitive matters disappear rather than pursuing them through normal legal processes. Faced with this institutional betrayal, Sarah made the crucial decision to bypass official channels entirely. She secretly provided Rebecca with copies of all evidence, including the complete recordings, photographs, and documentation that proved the scope of the corruption network. Rebecca, working with trusted colleagues at the Times, prepared a comprehensive exposé that would be published simultaneously with partner newspapers in the United States and Europe, making it impossible for British authorities to suppress the story through legal intimidation. The night before publication, Sarah received a final visit from Lady Catherine, who arrived at her apartment with what she claimed was a generous offer to resolve their misunderstanding. Detective Matthews, I think there's been a terrible miscommunication about our earlier conversation, Lady Catherine said with false warmth. Perhaps a nice vacation would help you gain perspective on these complex constitutional matters. I've arranged for a month-long assignment with Interpol in Switzerland, with full salary and excellent accommodations. When Sarah declined this obvious attempt to remove her from London during the story's publication, Lady Catherine's mask finally slipped completely. You have no idea what you're destroying, Lady Catherine said coldly. The monarchy represents stability that has protected this nation for centuries. Your misguided pursuit of absolute transparency will damage institutions that millions of people depend upon for security and national identity. Sarah responded with quiet determination. The monarchy deserves protection from people like you who have corrupted it for personal gain. My investigation isn't attacking the crown. It's defending it from criminals who have exploited their positions of trust. The story broke simultaneously in London, New York, and Paris at exactly 6 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Thursday morning in November 2023. The headlines read, Palace Corruption Exposed, Secret Recordings Reveal Systematic Fraud, and Security Breaches at Highest Levels of Royal Household. Rebecca's article included audio excerpts from Marcus's recordings, photographs of financial documents, and detailed analysis showing how the corruption network had operated for years without detection. The evidence was so comprehensive and well-documented that initial attempts to dismiss it as unfounded speculation quickly collapsed. Within hours, Prime Minister's questions in Parliament featured demands for immediate investigations, while international media picked up the story as evidence of broader problems within British institutions. The scandal dominated news coverage for weeks, triggering parliamentary inquiries, criminal investigations, and constitutional discussions about oversight of royal finances. Sir Edmund Whitmore and Lady Catherine Pembroke were arrested within 72 hours of the story's publication, charged with fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Official Secrets Act. Marcus Thompson, Thomas Bradley, and Jennifer Walsh were provided police protection and legal immunity in exchange for their cooperation with official investigations. Sarah found herself temporarily assigned to a joint task force investigating the full scope of the corruption network, working with investigators from multiple agencies to trace financial flows and identify all participants in the criminal conspiracy. The investigation ultimately revealed that the palace corruption had operated for over 6 years, stealing approximately £60 million from charitable organizations and compromising British security through unauthorized disclosure of classified information to foreign powers. Most importantly, the scandal led to comprehensive reforms in royal financial oversight, with new transparency requirements and independent auditing processes designed to prevent similar corruption in the future. Marcus Thompson, despite the personal costs he'd endured, expressed satisfaction that his decision to record the criminal conversations had finally held powerful people accountable for their actions. "I spent my whole career protecting the crown," Marcus told Rebecca during a follow-up interview. "It turns out the biggest threat to the monarchy wasn't foreign enemies or Republican movements. It was criminals within the system who thought they could exploit their positions without consequences." Sarah's investigation proved that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable when dedicated individuals refused to accept corruption as inevitable. The courage shown by Marcus, Thomas, Jennifer, and others who risked everything to expose the truth demonstrated that ordinary people could still defend democratic values against those who sought to undermine them for personal gain. The royal household, cleansed of its criminal elements, emerged stronger and more trustworthy than before, proving that transparency and accountability actually strengthened rather than weakened the institutions they were designed to protect. Detective Sarah Matthews spent 3 sleepless nights analyzing Marcus Thompson's recordings before she fully understood the magnitude of what she'd uncovered. Working alone in a secure room at Scotland Yard, using specialized audio equipment to verify authenticity, Sarah documented conversations that revealed systematic corruption reaching the highest levels of the royal household. The first recording that caught Sarah's attention featured Sir Edmund Whitmore, the palace's chief financial advisor, discussing creative accounting methods with Lady Catherine Pembroke, the private secretary to senior royals. Their conversation, recorded at 2:47 a.m. on March 15, 2022, revealed how charitable donations intended for veterans organizations had been redirected through shell companies before ending up in private accounts. "The Veterans Fund transfer went smoothly," Sir Edmund's voice said clearly on the recording. "15 million through the Cayman subsidiary, then distributed as planned. The beauty is that the charity shows full donation amounts in their public reports, but the actual disbursement comes from our discretionary funds." Lady Catherine's response chilled Sarah to the bone. "Excellent. The Prime Minister's office will never audit charitable flows, especially ones connected to military support. We can increase the diversions next quarter without raising suspicions." Sarah paused the recording, realizing she was listening to evidence of large-scale fraud against military charities. As someone whose brother had served in Afghanistan, the casual way these officials discussed stealing from veterans made her physically sick. But she forced herself to continue analyzing the evidence. The second major revelation came from a recording made 6 weeks later, featuring a conversation between Lady Catherine and someone identified only as Minister Phillips. This discussion centered on suppressing media investigations into royal travel expenses through strategic information leaks and coordinated pressure on newspaper editors. "The Guardian journalist is getting too close to the real numbers," Lady Catherine explained. "We need to give him something else to chase, preferably something that makes the previous story look trivial." Minister Phillips responded with disturbing casualness. "I'll arrange for some minor scandal to surface next week, something involving a distant royal cousin and social media indiscretions. The press loves that sort of thing, and it'll bury any serious investigation for months." Sarah realized she was witnessing evidence of systematic media manipulation designed to protect the royal family from legitimate scrutiny. The recordings showed these officials treating democratic oversight as an obstacle to be circumvented rather than a constitutional requirement to be respected. But the most shocking discovery came from a recording made in July 2022, featuring Sir Edmund discussing direct payments from foreign governments in exchange for unofficial diplomatic access. The conversation revealed that wealthy international figures were essentially purchasing private meetings with senior royals through charitable contributions that never reached their intended destinations. The Saudi arrangement is particularly profitable, Sir Edmund explained to an unidentified companion. They donate $50 million annually to our environmental foundation. We retain $30 million for operational expenses, and they receive quarterly private briefings on British energy policy. Everyone benefits. Sarah recognized this as potential evidence of treason, selling access to state secrets for personal enrichment. The casual tone of these discussions suggested such arrangements were routine rather than exceptional, indicating systematic corruption that had operated for years without detection. As Sarah continued analyzing the recordings, she began noticing surveillance of her own activities. Unmarked vehicles appeared regularly outside her apartment. Her phone conversations developed strange background noises, and colleagues at Scotland Yard began asking unusual questions about her current caseload. The pressure intensified when Sarah's supervisor, Chief Inspector Morrison, called her to an unexpected meeting. Morrison, whom Sarah had trusted for years, seemed nervous and uncomfortable as he explained that certain influential parties had expressed concerns about the direction of her investigation. "Sarah, I need you to understand the delicate nature of this situation," Morrison said, avoiding direct eye contact. "Palace security investigations require special handling, especially when they involve sensitive personnel matters. Perhaps it would be better to focus on the technical aspects of the missing surveillance footage rather than pursuing broader questions about staff activities." Sarah realized that pressure was being applied from sources powerful enough to influence senior police officials. The investigation that had started as a routine security inquiry was now threatening people with sufficient influence to reach into Scotland Yard itself. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah continued her analysis of Marcus's recordings. She discovered evidence of systematic tax evasion through offshore trusts, manipulation of royal staff pension funds for personal investments, and coordination with private security firms to suppress negative media coverage through intimidation tactics. One particularly disturbing recording revealed discussions about neutralizing potential whistleblowers through character assassination campaigns. Lady Catherine's voice described detailed plans for destroying the credibility of anyone who might expose their activities. "The beauty of our approach," Lady Catherine explained to Sir Edmund, "is that we never have to deny specific allegations. We simply ensure that anyone making accusations appears unreliable, mentally unstable, or motivated by personal grievances. The media does the rest of our work for us." Sarah shuddered as she realized Marcus Thompson's resignation and subsequent paranoia weren't products of guilt or imagination. He'd been targeted by a sophisticated campaign designed to discredit potential witnesses to their criminal activities. The recordings also revealed that Sarah's own investigation had been anticipated and discussed. A conversation from just 2 weeks earlier featured Sir Edmund and Lady Catherine talking about managing the police inquiry through appropriate channels. "Detective Matthews has an excellent reputation," Sir Edmund noted. "But she also has financial pressures, mortgage payments, her mother's medical expenses, student loans from her law degree. People facing such pressures often prove amenable to reasonable suggestions about career advancement opportunities." Lady Catherine's response was coldly calculating. "And if financial incentives prove insufficient, her service record shows several minor procedural violations that could be reinterpreted as serious misconduct if necessary. We have multiple options for ensuring her cooperation." Sarah felt a chill of recognition as she realized these people had investigated her personal finances and career history in preparation for corrupting or destroying her if she proved uncooperative. The conversation revealed they'd done similar background research on dozens of police officers, judges, journalists, and government officials who might potentially threaten their operations. But Sarah also discovered that Marcus Thompson hadn't been their only security concern. The recordings revealed discussions about at least 3 other palace employees who'd noticed irregularities and had to be managed through various means. One had been transferred to a remote Scottish estate. Another had suffered a convenient accident that required extended medical leave, and a third had been arrested on fabricated charges that were later quietly dropped after he agreed to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The systematic nature of their corruption became clear as Sarah analyzed 18 months of recorded conversations. These weren't isolated incidents or opportunistic crimes. They represented a coordinated criminal enterprise that had infiltrated the highest levels of the royal household and operated with virtual impunity for years. Sarah's analysis revealed that the scope of financial fraud alone exceeded £50 million annually, while the broader implications of selling state access to foreign interests represented security breaches that could have compromised national interests on multiple occasions. As Sarah prepared her preliminary report, she received an unexpected visitor at Scotland Yard. Lady Catherine Pembroke arrived unannounced, requesting a private meeting to discuss mutual concerns about the ongoing investigation. Detective Matthews, Lady Catherine began with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. I understand you've been working very hard on this palace security matter. I wanted to personally express our appreciation for your thoroughness and discretion. Sarah remained professional, but wary as Lady Catherine continued. Of course, investigations of this nature often uncover information that, while technically accurate, might be misunderstood if taken out of context. Palace operations involve complex arrangements that could appear irregular to those unfamiliar with constitutional protocols. Lady Catherine, then, made what Sarah recognized as both a bribe and a threat disguised as career advice. I've been impressed by your investigative skills, detective. There are opportunities in palace security that offer excellent advancement prospects for officers with your capabilities. Alternatively, mishandling sensitive royal matters has historically proven very damaging to promising careers. Sarah thanked Lady Catherine for her visit, but made no commitments, knowing that any response could be interpreted as either acceptance of corruption or defiance that would trigger retaliation. After Lady Catherine left, Sarah realized she was now completely alone in her investigation, surrounded by people who either worked for the criminals she was investigating or could be pressured into abandoning her. That evening, Sarah made copies of all evidence and secured them in multiple locations, knowing that her next decisions would either expose one of the biggest scandals in British history or result in her own destruction. The recordings she'd analyzed proved that Marcus Thompson's claims were not only true but represented just the visible portion of a criminal conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the British establishment. As Sarah prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous phase of her investigation, she understood that she was fighting people who controlled vast resources, had corrupted numerous officials, and had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their operations. But she also knew that the evidence in her possession could finally hold these criminals accountable and protect the integrity of institutions that millions of British citizens trusted and respected. Detective Sarah Matthews never expected her routine investigation into palace security breaches would lead her into the most explosive royal scandal of the century. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October 2023, when palace officials contacted Scotland Yard about missing surveillance footage from the East Wing corridors. Sarah had worked royal protection cases before, but nothing prepared her for what she discovered in the basement archives of Buckingham Palace. Among dusty boxes of old security reports, she found something that shouldn't exist, a digital recording device hidden behind outdated filing cabinets, still blinking with a red recording light. The device belonged to Marcus Thompson, a former royal guard who had worked the night shift for 15 years before his sudden resignation 6 months earlier. Palace records showed Marcus left citing personal reasons, but Sarah's investigation revealed a different story. Marcus had been recording conversations in the private corridors for over 2 years, collecting evidence of something he believed the public needed to know. Sarah's first breakthrough came when she tracked down Marcus to a small apartment in South London. The man who answered the door looked nothing like the confident guard she'd seen in official photographs. Marcus appeared tired, constantly checking over his shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. He initially refused to speak with her, claiming he'd signed confidentiality agreements that could land him in prison. "You don't understand what you're asking," Marcus told Sarah through the barely opened door. "These people have power you can't imagine. They've already destroyed my career, my pension, everything I worked for. Now you want me to risk my freedom too." But Sarah persisted, explaining that the missing surveillance footage had created a security investigation that wouldn't go away. She assured Marcus that as a police detective, she could offer some protection if he cooperated with the official inquiry. After 3 visits and several phone calls, Marcus finally agreed to meet at a neutral location, a small cafe in Camden where they could talk privately. What Marcus revealed during their first real conversation shocked even Sarah, who thought she'd heard everything during her 20 years in law enforcement. Marcus explained that his recording activities hadn't started as some elaborate plan to expose royal secrets. Instead, they began accidentally when he witnessed something during his regular patrol that troubled him deeply. "I was doing my usual rounds," Marcus explained, stirring his coffee nervously. "It was around 2 in the morning, maybe 3 weeks into my assignment on the East Wing night shift. I heard voices coming from the private study, which was unusual because that area should have been empty." Marcus described how he'd positioned himself near the study door, initially just to ensure no unauthorized persons had entered the restricted area. But the conversation he overheard made him realize this wasn't a security breach. It was something far more serious. The voices belonged to senior royal staff members discussing financial arrangements that sounded highly irregular. Marcus heard detailed conversations about offshore accounts, undeclared gifts from foreign dignitaries, and systematic methods for avoiding official record-keeping requirements. As someone who'd spent his entire adult life serving the crown with absolute loyalty, Marcus felt torn between his duty to protect royal privacy and his growing concern about potential criminal activity. "At first, I convinced myself I'd misunderstood," Marcus told Sarah. "These are people I'd trusted completely, people I'd have taken a bullet for without hesitation. But the conversations kept happening, always late at night, always in areas where they thought no security personnel could overhear." Marcus's decision to begin recording came after he witnessed what appeared to be a heated argument between 2 senior advisors about covering tracks before an upcoming audit. He realized that his word alone would never be believed against such powerful figures, but audio evidence might protect both himself and the institution he'd served faithfully. Using his security access, Marcus purchased a small digital recording device and began documenting the late-night meetings. Over 18 months, he accumulated dozens of hours of recorded conversations covering financial irregularities, attempts to influence media coverage of royal activities, and discussions about suppressing information that could embarrass certain family members. The recordings revealed a complex web of financial mismanagement that went far beyond simple bookkeeping errors. Marcus had documented conversations about charitable donations being diverted to personal accounts, expensive gifts being sold privately instead of being declared to official gift registries, and systematic efforts to hide the true costs of royal travel from parliamentary oversight. The worst part wasn't the money, Marcus explained to Sarah. It was hearing them laugh about fooling the public, treating taxpayers like they were too stupid to understand what was happening. These are people who present themselves as servants of the nation while enriching themselves at the nation's expense. But Marcus's recording activities eventually attracted attention. He noticed his shifts being changed unexpectedly, his access to certain areas being restricted without explanation, and subtle questions from supervisors about his activities during quiet periods. Someone suspected he was aware of things he shouldn't know. The pressure intensified when Marcus was called to a meeting with the head of palace security. Without directly accusing him of anything, his supervisor made it clear that recent irregularities in security procedures had been noticed, and that guards who couldn't maintain appropriate boundaries might find their positions under review. "They never said they knew about the recordings," Marcus told Sarah. "But they didn't have to. The message was clear: stop whatever I was doing, or face consequences that would destroy my career and probably my life." Marcus tried to comply, stopping his recording activities and avoiding the areas where the suspicious meetings occurred. But his conscience wouldn't let him forget what he'd witnessed. He began suffering from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and growing paranoia about being watched. His work performance declined, leading to additional scrutiny from supervisors who seemed increasingly suspicious of his behavior. The breaking point came when Marcus overheard a conversation suggesting that certain security personnel might need to be transferred to less sensitive positions if they continued showing signs of unreliability. Realizing his position had become untenable, Marcus submitted his resignation letter, citing personal health issues that required him to step back from demanding security work. But, even after leaving the palace, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being monitored. He noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked near his apartment, received strange phone calls with no one speaking, and found evidence that someone had searched his personal belongings during his absence. "I knew I had to do something with those recordings," Marcus told Sarah. "Keeping them was dangerous, but destroying them felt like betraying everything I'd sworn to protect. The palace, the crown, the country, they all deserve better than what I'd witnessed." Sarah listened to Marcus's account with growing fascination and concern. As a detective, she recognized the signs of someone telling the truth about traumatic experiences. Marcus's emotional responses, his detailed memories, and his obvious fear all suggested he was being honest about what he'd recorded. But Sarah also understood the enormous implications of what Marcus was claiming. If his recordings were authentic, they represented evidence of systematic financial misconduct at the highest levels of the royal household. Such revelations could trigger parliamentary investigations, criminal prosecutions, and a constitutional crisis that might threaten the monarchy itself. "I need to hear these recordings," Sarah told Marcus. "But I also need you to understand that once I officially acknowledge their existence, there's no going back. This becomes a formal criminal investigation with all the consequences that brings." Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, weighing his options. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything's on here," he said quietly. 18 months of conversations that show what really happens when they think nobody's listening. Sarah took the drive, knowing that her investigation had just taken a turn that would change everything. Whatever was on those recordings would either vindicate Marcus's claims or expose him as a fantasist with access to sensitive areas. Either way, the truth about palace operations was about to become public knowledge. As Sarah prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus grabbed her arm gently. "Detective, you need to be careful," he said urgently. "These people have resources you can't imagine, and they've already shown they're willing to destroy anyone who threatens them. Don't trust anyone completely, and don't let yourself be alone with evidence they want to disappear." Sarah drove back to Scotland Yard with Marcus's warnings echoing in her mind, and the USB drive burning like a hot coal in her pocket. She knew that examining those recordings would either launch the biggest royal scandal in decades or end her own career in disgrace. But, as a detective sworn to follow evidence wherever it led, she had no choice but to discover the truth about what Marcus Thompson had witnessed during his years guarding the crown's most sensitive secrets.